Welcome to Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. Your Day Weather Podcast brought to you by the Advocates Injury Attorneys. If you've been injured in an accident, don't face it alone. Get an experienced local Wyoming attorney on your side. Free consultations at WyomingAdvocates.com or call 307-800-1952. You deserve an advocate. Better weather, better days are ahead. With a warming trend through Saturday, there'll still be some windy areas. We're just into that time of year when it's not windy, that's a thing. We're going to have a small little Pacific system come through later in the week. So from California through the Great Basin states into parts of Colorado and into Kansas, you're going to have a little bit of shower activity with that system. Strong jet stream winds are developing as expected in the North Pacific, and then we have to deal with them late in the weekend. This is going to be especially true Sunday into Monday, where we're going to see some raucous weather in the Pacific Northwest, and snow will come into the northern Rockies, especially the higher elevations, with wind coming onto the plains. The question is what happens after those jet stream energy winds, that strong jet stream pushes in. What happens after that? Well, we'll try to sort that out because the computer modeling is going to have a really difficult time and really should not be trusted past this weekend. Beautiful sunrise, sunset photos coming in. This one from Kansas. Beautiful shot of some fresh snow on Elk Mountain yesterday. And sunrises, sunsets. We're just into that season where we can get a lot of color with these low sun angles that happen in the evenings and in the mornings. Satellite photo shows not much going on. Yesterday's storm system is now up here into the upper plains, but you can see a lot of clear skies in the western United States. We do have this low off the west coast that you can barely see. The reason you can't see it because you got to go to the water vapor. Here it is on the water vapor. You see the swirl? It just hasn't picked up moisture yet, but it is starting to drop a little bit of moisture here. And this low, while looking not like much of anything, is going to pick up moisture as it heads inland. Otherwise, we've got some high-level water vapor, but there's just nothing to really drive it to the ground or produce much in the way of clouds. Hence, we've got a nice little gap into the weather until this. Looking out over the Pacific, here are the Aleutians. We've got a deep low there right now, and then look at this. These are some really strong jet stream wind clouds beginning to develop. Cold air, as evidenced by the speckles. When you see speckles like this over the water, that means there's a deep pocket of cold air underneath that area of low pressure that's headed in towards the Gulf of Alaska and Aleutians. So this is what's going to be coming in to the Pacific Northwest late Friday into Saturday, then the northern Rockies later on. When you look at the 500 millibar chart, you see that low off the coast of California, but generally westerly flow, Pacific air flooding the nation, except up here in the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes where that low is. So we're going to put together a few days here where the weather looks pretty good. But let's back up. Look at the color change in the map from up in the Gulf of Alaska from today by Thursday. See how all that blue comes in? You can see that change developing right there. There's the upper level low by noon Thursday. It's about over Salt Lake. It's a little system, but it will pick up enough moisture. And by Friday morning, it's going to be down near Trinidad or into the San Luis Valley there, and you'll have a little bit of weather with that system. And here it is. You can see the trail of the low from Central California through Utah into Colorado, then picking a little bit more moisture up here in the southern plains, producing a bit more in the way of rain and thunderstorm activity. There'll be a little bit of snow falling in the high country of Colorado and Utah and back into the Sierras as it comes through. So it's a little bit of a wrinkle, but not a major system. Then Saturday, there are those jet stream winds poised to begin to move into Seattle and Portland here, into the far northern areas of California, just driving moisture off the Pacific inland. Cold air aloft comes in. But what is complicating things, and you'll see here in a minute, is what not necessarily is what's coming off the Pacific, but what's going on here. Because this is going to affect what all of this jet stream energy is able to do as it penetrates into western areas of Canada and western North America this weekend. So essentially, for most areas, except the Pacific Northwest, the weather generally going to be fair through Saturday, the exception of that little Colorado low. And you can see when we get to Saturday, this is noon Saturday, up at 30,000 feet, if you were to take a plane ride from Tokyo to San Francisco, you'd get there on time or beat your time for sure. We've got jet stream winds that are approaching 200 miles an hour. So here it comes into the coast by Saturday. So what happens to all of this once it gets into North America? Well, when it comes into the continent, it starts hitting mountains. It doesn't have that nice flat flow of air with no resistance over the water. Now we're talking about high level altitude wind, so it's not so much resistance, it's moving into the continent from the ocean environment to the continent, where a lot of physics gets involved, because that upper level wind pattern and the whole wind pattern's got to interact from an ocean environment now to a continental environment. So things start to happen and starts to change. So we drive that strong jet stream wind into the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies. But look at this area of high pressure right here that's building out ahead of it up into the Great Lakes in the Midwest. So this is pushing up against it, and it's giving it some resistance. So this jet stream energy is kind of fighting this. And here lies in the problems once we get past this weekend, is where does all that energy go? Does it hit that high pressure ridge and kind of get diffuse and weaken and break down? Or does it break off and become its own system? You can see the Pacific Northwest this weekend headed towards some very wet weather. Even some moisture gets east of the Cascades into portions of Idaho there, into Boise, at least the chances of that. So it's going to be a significant event there. When we start comparing the models, this is where things start to get, well, wonky. This high pressure ridge basically is wanting to take this jet stream energy and say, no, you can't really go much further. Either you got to undercut me or you got to get forced up into Canada. And so this is where we're just not sure what's going to happen, because the physics get very, very complicated with what's going on here. The European model by noon Monday has this negative tilt to the trough. What do I mean by negative? Troughs have tilts to them. We call that a negative. This would be a positive tilt. This is a negative tilt. When you get a negative tilt, the jet stream energy tends to be on the back side of here, and you always have to watch for negative tilted systems. Why? Because they tend to defy logic sometimes, and they tend to be their own, have their own personality, and can sometimes break off from the jet stream. There's a general overall consensus through noon Monday when you look at the other models, but there's some differences. So the basic European model, the deterministic, looks like this. The AI version has the low all the way up here into south central Canada. But you see this straight line flow? That's just wrong. You're not going to get flow like this, that's straight going over the big mountain ranges of the Northern Rockies. So this AI version, I'm sorry, the AI version is just, it's not going to get this right. You can't have it that straight for that long of a distance coming into the continent. So something like this is more likely. The Canadian model is somewhat similar, but you notice the Canadian model's got some kinks in it. It's not as straight, so it's understanding things a little bit better. But the Canadian is saying, oh, okay, we're going to hit this ridge, and so we're going to go all up into here. The GFS model is basically saying the same thing. So we have four model suites that are generally saying it's going to hit that ridge. The jet stream energy is going to kind of dig in, but it may not become a big storm system, although it will produce a lot of weather. But here's one wrinkle, and this is how you have to view things when you have a situation with these strong jet stream winds. The UK Met model, which I don't show you very often, what it's doing is it's saying that jet stream energy is so strong, and yes, I'm hitting this big ridge here, but I have enough for the storm to get cut off and become a storm system over the Central Plains like this, which is kind of what we were showing you yesterday. So we have one model that's an outlier. We have 3 or 4 models that are showing something completely different. Should you go with the crowd? Should you go with, quote, the consensus of the modeling? I don't know, because I've seen this happen before where a negatively tilted trough does get cut off like this. But we're talking about something that's nearly a week away. I'm just showing it to you to show you what we see, what we look at, and why these long-range forecasts past 5 or 6 days can be a tricky proposition. Have yourself a very good Tuesday.